Hello and welcome to this video where we'll see what we can do with the ICC Shiny app and how to use it. Specifically, we'll see how to choose a relevant ICC value for the sample size calculation of a cluster randomized trial following a proposed decision tree, how to estimate the ICC for different outcome distributions with your own dataset, and how to incorporate uncertainty to this estimate. And finally, how to visualize the ICC database and add your own estimates to it. Choosing a relevant ICC estimate for the sample size calculation of a cluster randomized trial is not necessarily straightforward. Still, a small change in the ICC value can have a significant impact on the number of subjects to include in a trial. This proposed decision tree can help in a strategy for choosing a value. However, using a flexible approach depending on the circumstances is always recommended. The first question to ask is whether you have data that could inform the value of the ICC, coming from a pilot study or routine data collection. If the answer is yes, you could ask yourself, are the outcome variable in the data and the level of the cluster comparable than those of the trial you are designing? If yes, you could estimate the ICC and incorporate a low degree of uncertainty to choose a conservative value, and we'll see how we can do this using the app. However, be aware that a higher ICC value is not always associated with an increased sample size, so you would need to adapt to your own case. If the answer is no, then there is no reason why you should treat this ICC any differently than others available on sources, so you could look at the right part of the tree where no data is available. In this case, you could search for relevant ICC estimates available on sources such as trial publications or databases. If you can find several ones, you could derive a posterior distribution with a Bayesian approach to choose a conservative value, and we'll see how this can be done using the app. If you can find only one relevant estimate, you could incorporate a high degree of uncertainty to choose a conservative value. If you can't find any, you could consider less relevant estimates and go back to the previous step, as it will always be preferable than just picking a random ICC value. Now we'll see how we can estimate the ICC with our own dataset. To do that, we simply need to go to the Data tab and answer the few questions below. Let's pretend our data are in an Excel file, so we'll just need to click on Excel. As you can see, we can estimate the ICC for different outcome distributions. For this practical example, let's try with a continuous outcome. Finally, we need to answer whether all the data are in the same condition or not. For example, if some patients are receiving different treatments, or a treatment versus a placebo, we might want to account for it to get an adjusted ICC. But in this example, let's pretend we have baseline data without any treatments, so we'll just click on Yes. In the Excel file, the data must be disposed in a vertical manner with two columns, as we can see on the image below. The first column should be for the cluster identifiers, and the second for the outcome values. We then need to fetch our data by clicking on Browse. If the first rows in our file contain the variable names, we would just need to tick this header box. Now we are ready to load our file. In the first tab, we get ICC estimates from different methods. If we go to the Graphs tab, we will be able to visualize different plots depending on the outcome distribution. They will help in visualizing the magnitude of the ICC and enable to get an insight of our data with some summary statistics. On the Data tab, we'll have access to basic information such as the number of rows in the dataset, the number of clusters, and the coefficient of variation of cluster sizes, which can be helpful information. Our data are also displayed below so we can check that it has been correctly imported into the app. If we want to incorporate uncertainty to one of these estimates, for example, the one estimated with a linear mixed model, we just need to go to the Uncertainty tab and complete the required information. The value of the ICC estimate, the number of individuals in the dataset, and the number of clusters. This will enable us to visualize the empirical cumulative distributions based on 3 different methods. And most importantly, we will get the 95% confidence interval and interquartile range values, and this can be helpful if we need to choose a conservative value with a more or less important degree of uncertainty for a sample size calculation, as explained previously in the decision tree. If we want to learn more about these 3 different methods, we can click on the link above, which will lead us to the relevant publication. Now we'll see how we can derive a posterior distribution to choose a relevant ICC value for the sample size calculation of a cluster-randomized trial based on several previous estimates. This can be done by going to the Previous Estimates tab. Let's say that we want to design a cluster-randomized trial with body mass index as the primary outcome. The first thing that we would need to do is search in the literature for relevant ICC estimates with body mass index as the primary outcome. We can also search for estimates in databases, such as the ICC database, which we can access by just clicking on this tab. We can now enter the term BMI, as it will filter to only display those ICC estimates containing the term BMI, which is relevant to us. By the way, if we want to add an ICC estimate to this database, which is a great idea, we would just need to click on Add ICC Estimate, and it will open a form to complete with the relevant information, and click on Submit once done. This is valuable as it will help the research community in getting relevant information to design their study appropriately and perform more accurate sample size calculation, which will avoid recruiting too many or too few patients. Going back to the previous estimates framework, what we need to do is to give the app an Excel file containing our relevant previous estimates. A template file is available to download, which will help us in getting the required information. Once we open it, we can see that it contains all the fields that need to be completed for the several previous estimates. The value of the ICC, the number of individuals, the number of clusters, the outcome identifier such as body mass index for example, the study identifier, which can be the study acronym for example. We can also assign weights for the outcome and the study. For example, if the outcome of the ICC estimate is body mass index, we can select Same Outcome, which will assign a stronger weight to this estimate, and enable the app to give it more importance than other estimates with lower weights. Indeed, if the outcome is a bit different than our target, BMI in our example, then it's possible to downgrade the outcome weight appropriately. The principle is the same for the study weight. If the study settings are very similar than the trial that we are designing, such as the same cluster level and same patient population, then we can click on Very Similar Study or otherwise downgrade the study weight appropriately. On the next spreadsheet, we can visualize an example of how this file should be completed appropriately. This is a dummy completed file for our body mass index example, with estimates that could have been found in the literature or databases. We'll just need to look for it, then to click on Load the file, wait for a minute or so, and the app will do the rest. Now we can visualize several posterior distributions based on 4 models, which have different assumptions. To learn more about these different models, and know which one we should be prioritizing for our own case, we can click on the link above which will open the relevant publication. The 97.5th percentile of one of these distributions is usually chosen as a conservative value for the sample size calculation, as described previously in the decision tree. If we want to choose another degree of uncertainty, we can check one of the graphs below and choose an ICC value based on the empirical cumulative distribution of the chosen model. For example, the third quartile corresponds to an empirical cumulative distribution of 0.875, which leads to an ICC value of roughly 0.022 for Model 2. We hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.